It began with cold steel and a courtroom echo. My name is Malcolm Wren, and I was sitting in family court on a Tuesday morning, across from my ex-wife, Tessa Vaughn. She wore that same pearl necklace she always wore when she wanted to look fragile, the same one she'd clutched during our anniversary dinner the night she accused me of hacking into her accounts. Today, she clutched it like it held her lies in P. Willis. She leaned forward, her eyes rimmed in fake tears, her lips trembling as she spoke to the judge. He's a violent monster. I fear for my life. Her voice broke on the word monster, like it had rehearsed 1,000 times in front of a mirror. Her attorney, a slick man with a perfect part in his hair and the kind of smile that makes people think he's got their best interests at heart, passed around a set of glossy photos. I knew them before I even saw them. Carefully staged, deliberately timed snapshots of fake bruises, letters torn in just the right way, transcripts of voicemails that sounded like they'd been spliced together by a half-rate editing app. My lawyer had warned me this might happen. I prepared for it, but no amount of warning makes you ready for the way people look at you when they think you're the monster in the room. I didn't argue. I didn't blink. I just sat there, hands folded, waiting. Because I learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful weapon you can have in a room full of lies is silence. The judge's gavel tapped once, then twice. Mr. Wren, do you have anything to say? His voice was even, but I could hear the tension behind it, the weight of a man who'd seen too many broken families and too many manipulations from both sides of the aisle. I didn't stand. I didn't need to. I simply slid a sealed envelope across the table, the wax seal unbroken, the weight of everything I'd carried for the last year pressing down on the polished wood between us. The bailiff picked it up and handed it to the judge. He opened it, I scanning the first page, then flipping to the next, his face going from bored to pale to something close to fear. I watched the lines on his forehead deepen. I watched his hands tighten around the pages. And then he looked up at Tessa like he was seeing her for the first time. Bailiff, the judge growled, his voice low and dangerous. Arrest this woman immediately. His tone had changed, no longer the impartial judge, but a man who just realized he'd been played. The courtroom erupted in noise. Tessa's mouth fell open, her eyes wide, her hand dropping from that stupid pearl necklace. What? No. He's the liar, she screamed, her voice cracking into hysteria as the bailiff moved toward her. Her lawyer's face went slack, like he'd been punched. Papers fell from his hands as he stammered something about due process, about evidence, but no one was listening. I could feel the room shifting, every pair of eyes turning from me to her, from the supposed monster to the real one. The judge's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Ma'am, do you have any idea who your ex-husband really is? His question hung in the air, heavy and final. Tessa's mouth opened, then closed, her face paling as her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. And then the judge continued, each word like a hammer strike. The federal agents outside want to know where you hid the evidence. That was the moment the last thread of her composure snapped. She let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a sob and a scream, and tried to push away from the table. But the bailiff was faster, hands on her arms, pulling her upright as she twisted and thrashed. I sat there, still as a statue, feeling the weight of every betrayal, every sleepless night, every moment I'd spent wondering if I was imagining things, if I was paranoid. Because that's what she'd done, made me doubt myself, made me think I was the one losing my grip on reality. But I wasn't. I never had been. And now, finally, the truth was standing in the middle of this courtroom, screaming in designer heels and a pearl necklace that had never been anything but costume jewelry. The judge glanced at me then, his eyes softer but still wary. Mr. Wren, please remain seated while we sort this out. He looked at the bailiff. Take Ms. Vaughn into custody. Confiscate any personal items. And notify the federal agents that we have her. Tessa's screams echoed through the room, bouncing off the marble walls like a broken record. Her lawyer tried to follow, but the judge's gavel struck the wood with a force that silenced even him. This hearing is adjourned, he announced, his voice final. I watched as the bailiff led her away, her feet stumbling, her sobs raw and real now, no longer the practiced tears of a liar, but the real terror of someone who had finally lost control. The room emptied slowly. Reporters, lawyers, bystanders, everyone moved like they were in a daze. Some cast me curious glances, others avoided my eyes altogether. I stayed seated until the last person had left, the silence folding around me like a shroud. The judge approached me quietly. Mr. Wren, he said, his voice low. I don't know everything that's happened between you two, but I know this. Someone's going to answer for the lies she's told. I nodded once, unable to trust my voice, and he left me there, alone with the echo of his words. I picked up the envelope, the one that had changed everything, and turned it over in my hands. Inside were things no one in that courtroom could have imagined. Transcripts of phone calls between Tessa and arms brokers, bank statements linking her to offshore accounts, surveillance photos from a warehouse I'd been watching for months. Evidence that didn't just clear my name, but tore apart the web she'd spun around me. I'd spent a year gathering it. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt poured into that single file. And now, at last, it had done its job. As I stood and slipped the envelope back into my coat, I felt the weight of the last year lift from my shoulders. She tried to destroy me, tried to paint me as the monster in our story. But she'd underestimated me. Because the thing about monsters? Sometimes they're just men who refuse to be broken. I stepped out of the courtroom and into the hallway, the light brighter than it had any right to be. The federal agents were waiting, badges gleaming, eyes sharp. One of them nodded at me, a silent thank you. I nodded back, my jaw set. This wasn't over. Not yet. But the first battle had been won, and I wasn't about to lose the war. Let's rewind. 8 years ago, I was standing in a cavernous ballroom at a tech gala in Seattle, the kind of place where men with too much money and too little soul shook hands and traded secrets like they were commodities. I wasn't supposed to be there as myself. I was undercover, a cybersecurity consultant on paper, but in reality a federal asset chasing shadows, a multinational crypto laundering ring that had bled money from defense contracts and left bodies in its wake. My name was on a forged badge, my history scrubbed from databases. My mission was clear. Then I met Tessa Vaughn. She was standing near the bar, dressed in a deep green silk dress that caught the light like a blade, her laugh sharp, and knowing as she toyed with a man who thought he was hunting her when it was the other way around. I watched her for a while, letting the crowd move between us like waves on a shore, noting the way she carried herself, like she knew every man in the room would fall at her feet. And maybe they would have. She was beautiful, but that wasn't what caught me. It was the way her eyes flickered to me, once, twice, a question in their depths like she'd already decided I was different. I approached her with the easy confidence I'd practiced 100 times before. "Malcolm," I said, extending a hand. "Cybersecurity." She arched an eyebrow, lips curved into a half-smile. "Tessa," she replied. "Public relations." Her fingers were cool against mine, her grip firm. That was the first sign I should have recognized. No hesitation, no flutter of nerves. She was playing a role, just like me. But I'd spent so long inside other people's masks that I couldn't see hers for what it was. We talked for hours, drifting from the bar to a quiet alcove near the windows. She laughed at my jokes, told me about her clients, name-dropped influencers and politicians like they were beads on a string. I played my part too, dropping just enough hints about the kind of work I did to keep her interested without ever letting her see the truth. When the night ended, she slipped her card into my hand, a small, cream-colored rectangle with her name in embossed gold. "Call me," she said, her voice low, eyes locked on mine. And I did. God help me, I did. Within a year, we were married. A quick ceremony on a sunlit deck overlooking Puget Sound. Just us and the justice of the peace, no questions, no prying eyes. She didn't ask why I never posted photos of us on social media, why I kept 2 phones, one that never rang in front of her. She never asked why sometimes I'd leave in the middle of the night with no explanation. Maybe because she had her own secrets, or maybe because she didn't care. Love is a dangerous thing for a man like me, a man with enemies I couldn't name and a history I couldn't share. But I wanted it. God, I wanted it to be real. Then her brother Miles Vaughn entered the picture. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that belonged on a used car lot. He claimed to be a businessman, but even the word tasted wrong in my mouth. He was always around, lingering at our dinner table, borrowing money he never paid back, showing up with stories about business ventures in the Caribbean that made my hair stand on end. One night, I caught him in the garage, eyeing the contents of my laptop bag like a starving man at a buffet. I didn't confront him then. I just made a note. Because that's what I did. I logged every detail, every suspicious glance, every phone call he made when he thought no one was listening. And then there was Harper Lynn, Tessa's best friend since college. An influencer, or so she said. Her Instagram feed full of skincare routines and boss babe hashtags. But I'd seen her at a private airport one night, handing off a duffel bag to a man I knew from an Interpol watch list. I'd confronted her once, off the record, asking why she needed so many burner phones. She'd smiled that sweet, fake smile and told me I was paranoid. But the next day, 3 of my colleagues at the agency found spyware on their devices, and I knew it hadn't been paranoia at all. And then there was the warehouse. That warehouse on the south side of Seattle, tucked between a shipping yard and a row of abandoned offices. Tessa said it was for her import business, Artisan Decor, she claimed. Fair trade, supporting local artists. I'd even seen the invoices, the shipping manifest that looked clean at first glance. But the more I looked, the more the numbers didn't add up. A crate marked hand-woven baskets weighed 3 times what it should. A shipment listed as textiles was declared to customs as electronics. Red flags, one after another. But I didn't move then. I waited. Because that's the thing about a good cover, you wait until the mask slips. And Tessa's mask was starting to slip. Our marriage changed too. The little things came first, missed calls she claimed were from work, text at odd hours, unexplained absences. Then came the bigger things, the fights that started for no reason, the cold silences that lasted days. One night, in the middle of a storm, she screamed at me, her voice raw and venomous. "You think you're the smart one in this marriage? You'd be nothing without me." I'd stood there, the wind rattling the windows, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. And maybe I was. That night, I started a new file. I called it Operation Obsidian. Every time she lied, every time she slipped, I logged it. Every shadow in the warehouse, every wire transfer I could trace, every phone call to a number that didn't exist. I kept it all, because one day I knew I'd need it. I wanted to believe she loved me once. I wanted to believe there was something real between us. But every time I looked into her eyes, I saw the questions she never asked, and the ones she didn't want to answer. Maybe I was always the mark. Maybe she was always the lie. But I'd made a vow to protect the truth, even if it destroyed what little was left of us. Because in this world, the truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you who the enemy really is. And sometimes, the enemy is the one you shared your bed with. That warehouse on the south side of Seattle, what Tessa called her import business, always looked out of place to me. It was an old corrugated steel structure tucked between a shipping yard and a row of offices that had long since gone to rot. I used to pass by it on the way to agency briefings, and I'd catch a glimpse of a light burning at 2 in the morning, a truck idling for hours without unloading. She'd said it was for artisan decor, local artists, handmade crafts. But the invoices told a different story, shipments that weighed too much, descriptions that didn't match, payment transfers routed through shell companies in Belize. I'd been trained to spot these things, trained to wait for patterns to form, and the warehouse had become my private puzzle. Most nights, I sat in my car a block away, pretending to read, a thermos of coffee balanced on the dash. I watched the flow of trucks in and out, license plates I memorized, drivers who never looked up at the cameras. I logged every VIN, every timestamp, every invoice number. I cross-checked them against customs records and found enough discrepancies to make even a rookie auditor suspicious. I noted it all down in the Obsidian file, which was now a digital fortress of every lie Tessa had ever tried to sell. I kept the file locked under multiple layers of encryption, stored on a secure drive that not even Tessa could have found, and guarded by a kill switch that would wipe it all clean if it ever fell into the wrong hands. It was a Wednesday night when I first saw the watcher. I'd been parked across from the warehouse, scribbling notes, when I noticed the silhouette, a tall figure, standing by the chain-link fence. No uniform, no clipboard. Just standing, arms crossed, like he was waiting for something. At first, I thought it might have been a night guard. But then I saw the way he moved, fluid, deliberate, like someone trained to disappear in plain sight. I watched him through the scope of a small pair of binoculars I kept in the glove box. He was scanning the trucks, making notes on a pad, muttering into a small earpiece. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I knew enough to know he wasn't working for Tessa. He had the posture of an operative, shoulders loose but eyes sharp, every movement calculated. I recognized it because I lived it. A part of me wondered if he was there for the same reason I was, if he'd followed the same breadcrumbs that led me to that warehouse. But then he glanced toward my car, just a flicker of his gaze, but enough to make my pulse spike. I ducked down, cursing myself for getting sloppy. He didn't move, but I could feel him watching. After a minute, he turned and walked around the corner, disappearing into the shadows. I stayed low, waiting. When I finally raised my head, he was gone. I called Alina Sue at the agency the next morning. She'd been my lifeline through this mess, a cybersecurity analyst who had a knack for finding patterns in chaos. She'd helped me build the Obsidian file, layer by layer, even when the higher-ups didn't want to get involved. She answered on the first ring. "Ren," she said, her voice crisp. "Talk to me." I told her about the watcher, about the way he'd moved, the way he'd seemed to be looking for something. She was silent for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Sounds like someone's interested in the same target you are," she said. "You think it's one of ours?" I asked. Another pause. "Or one of hers," she replied. And that was the thought that made my stomach knot. After that, I doubled my surveillance. Every night, I'd slip into the shadows near the warehouse, camera in hand, listening for any sign of Tessa's voice, any whisper of a deal going down. I watched her shipments, crates marked with innocuous labels but weighing as much as small cars. I saw men I recognized from Interpol's most wanted lists, men who never used the front door and never left by the same route twice. And all the while, I documented everything: photos, videos, logs. I knew I was building a case that would either save me or bury me. Tessa changed during those nights. She wasn't the same woman I'd married. Maybe she never had been. She'd started coming home later, her hair mussed like she'd been in a fight or worse. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. She snapped at me over nothing, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Why are you always asking questions?" she hissed one night when I asked about a missing invoice. "You think you're so smart, but you'd be nothing without me." The words hit like a slap. Maybe they were supposed to, but I didn't react. I filed them away, just like everything else. I'd learned in my line of work that patience was more powerful than any weapon. I let her rants roll off me, let her insults wash over me like water on stone. Because every time she lied, she left a trail. And every time she tried to cover her tracks, I was already 3 steps ahead. I had a black vault of evidence. A fortress of facts that couldn't be argued away in a courtroom. And every night, I added to it. One night, I followed a truck from the warehouse to a private airstrip north of the city. The driver was a man named Ortiz, at least that was the name on his fake ID. I watched as crates were loaded onto a small plane. No questions asked. No customs agents in sight. I snapped photos from the cover of darkness, my breath fogging in the cold air. As the plane taxied down the runway, I thought of Tessa's smile, the way she'd laughed the first time we danced, and I wondered if any of it had been real. But the doubt didn't last long. The engine roared, and the plane lifted off into the night, carrying God knows what to God knows where. I texted Alina the tail number. Within minutes, she sent me a pingback, linked to arms deals in Prague. You were right. And that was the final piece of the puzzle. Tessa wasn't just smuggling decor. She was moving weapons, money, maybe even tech I couldn't name. And that warehouse was the beating heart of it all. I parked across the street and watched the lights flicker out one by one. The watcher hadn't been back for a while, but I could feel his presence like a shadow at my back. I wondered if he was watching me now, wondering the same thing I was. How deep this went, how many more lies we'd have to untangle before we found the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to hope. Because in the darkness of that night, I knew I wasn't the only one hunting the truth. And that meant maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to win. I should have seen the setup coming. I'd been trained to anticipate traps, to read the subtle shifts in a person's body language that told me something wasn't right. But with Tessa, I'd always let my guard slip a little too far, believing, despite everything, that there was still some part of her that remembered the man she'd married. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the small details at first. The way the lock on my apartment door felt just slightly off one night. The smell of a perfume that didn't belong to me lingering on my shirt sleeves. The subtle arrangement of papers on my desk that looked like they'd been disturbed and then carefully put back, just enough to let me know someone had been there. It started one Friday morning when I woke up to the light streaming in through the blinds, the city outside just beginning to hum with the usual chaos. I brewed my coffee, black and bitter, and sat down at my desk to review the files I'd compiled on the warehouse. The Obsidian file had grown into a living thing, evidence stacked on evidence, a digital fortress I'd built to protect the truth. I opened it and felt that strange, silent satisfaction I always got from seeing the puzzle pieces align. But then I noticed it, a missing line of code, a script that had been tampered with, one that could have leaked everything to anyone who knew how to look. My stomach twisted. I ran a trace, but it came back cold. Whoever had done it knew their way around my systems, and that meant they were trained. Trained like me. That's when the emails started. Dozens of them, all supposedly from me, emails I'd never written, to people I'd never contacted. Some were threats. Others were confessions of things I'd never done. One even said I was planning to blow up a government building. My name was on all of them, the signature perfect. I called Alina. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense. Ren, I'm looking at the logs. These emails are showing as coming from your server. I heard the rustle of papers, the click of her keyboard. But the headers don't match. It's a spoof, but it's good. Damn good. Whoever did this wants to bury you, and they've got the resources to do it. I closed my eyes, let the anger wash over me, and then pushed it down. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. The restraining order came next, served by a solemn-faced deputy with a clipboard in his hand and pity in his eyes. Mr. Wren, you've been served. I read it once, twice, then again. Claims of harassment, threats, a carefully crafted narrative that made me out to be every bit the monster Tessa always claimed I was. It was like reading a horror story written in my own name. I knew the game now. Tessa, or whoever was pulling her strings, had turned my own life against me. She'd built a paper trail so thick no one would bother to see the truth beneath it. Publicly, I said nothing. I let the rumors swirl, let the gossip spread like wildfire. Because that's what they wanted, to draw me out, to make me react. I'd seen this tactic before, used it myself on targets who thought they were safe behind their own lies. But this was different. This was personal. This was Tessa weaponizing the system, the same system I'd spent my career upholding. And that was the part that burned the most. Privately, I prepared my own counterattack. I called Alina and told her to send the Obsidian file to my contact in D.C., Special Agent Royce Marin. Royce had been my handler back in the early days, the kind of man who taught me that the truth is a weapon, but only if you know when to use it. I trusted him more than anyone left in my life. Ren, he said when he picked up, his voice low and gravelly, I've been waiting for your call. I could almost hear the smile behind his words. You've been baited, son. But it's bigger than we thought. I leaned forward, the weight of the city pressing in from every side. How big? I asked. A pause, then the line crackled. She's not working alone, he said. We've been tracking a network. Arms deals, crypto laundering, black market tech. Your wife is just the tip of the iceberg. I let that sink in, every memory of every fight, every lie she'd told me, clicking into place like the tumblers of a lock. We're sending backup, he said. I could hear the urgency in his tone. But Ren, watch your back. If she's got this deep, you can bet she's got people watching you too. I hung up, my fingers trembling just enough that I had to close my eyes and steady my breath. Backup was coming. But until then, I was on my own. And that meant I had to be ready for anything. That night, as the rain drummed against the windows, I packed a small go-bag, passport, cash, burner phone, a Glock 43 I'd kept since my field days. I stashed the Obsidian file on a secure drive in a place only I knew. Because even with backup on the way, I couldn't afford to let it fall into the wrong hands. I sat by the window, watching the street below, every shadow a possible threat. The city felt different now, every alley a potential ambush, every passerby a suspect. I'd lived like this before, but I'd never expected to be living like this because of her. At 2 a.m., I got a ping on my phone, a silent alert from the warehouse's perimeter cameras. Someone was there. I flicked through the feeds, my pulse thudding. A tall figure moved between the crates, flashlight in hand. Not Tessa. Too tall, too confident. I grabbed my jacket, tucked the Glock into my waistband, and slipped out the back door. The night air was cold, sharp, every breath a reminder that I was alive, that I was still fighting. I moved through the alleys, every step calculated. When I reached the warehouse, I stayed low, watching through a crack in the door. The figure moved like a ghost, checking crates, scanning invoices. I saw a flash of a badge clipped to his belt, federal issue. Backup. Royce's people. Relief washed over me in a slow wave. I stepped out into the open, hands raised. Agent Wren, he said, his voice calm, steady. We've got eyes on the whole area. You're clear. I exhaled, the tension seeping from my muscles. What's the plan? I asked. He gestured toward the crates. We've got enough here to sink her and half her network. But she's moving fast. If you've got anything else, anything at all, it's time to use it. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a flash drive. Operation Obsidian, I said. Everything she's done, everything she's planning. He nodded, a grim smile on his face. This is it, Ren. We bring her down. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd make it out of this alive. Because now, it wasn't just me. It was us. And Tessa had no idea how deep this went, or how far I'd go to stop her. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and damp, a Seattle cliché that suited my mood all too well. I stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, looking up at the building that had seen more broken promises than any confessional booth. I'd walked through those doors before, on other cases, wearing other faces. But this time was different. This time, it was my life on the line. I took a breath, steadying my nerves, then pulled the collar of my coat tight and stepped inside. The waiting room was full of hushed voices, rustling papers, and the smell of stale coffee. I could see Tessa through the glass partition, her lawyer beside her, their heads close together as they conferred. She wore white, a smart choice, I had to admit. The color of innocence. The color of the dove she wanted the world to see. Even from here, I could see the tremble in her hands, the way she dabbed at her eyes like a woman on the edge. But I knew better. That was her costume, the same one she'd worn the night she told the cameras I was the monster in our marriage. I found my seat near the front, my own lawyer beside me. He was good, a man I'd used on operations where discretion was paramount. But this was a different kind of battlefield. Here, the weapons were words and papers, the stakes my freedom. I scanned the room, the reporters with their notepads, the clerk with her tight bun and pinched lips, the judge's bench where the gavel waited like a guillotine. Tessa's lawyer rose first. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He launched into a monologue so polished it might have come from an actor's rehearsal. "Your Honor," he began, his voice a practiced blend of sympathy and outrage, "my client has endured unimaginable fear at the hands of Mr. Wren. She has been stalked, harassed, threatened, and defamed by the man she once called her husband." He turned and gestured to Tessa, who sniffled delicately, a single tear trailing down her cheek. He continued, laying out the fake emails, the doctored voicemails, the carefully crafted timeline that painted me as a predator lurking in her shadows. Every lie was a blow, every half-truth a dagger in my gut. And I let it happen, because that was the plan. I needed the lie to stretch as far as it could, to wrap around her like a noose. Then came Mrs. Ellison. She was a neighbor of ours back when Tessa and I lived together. Sweet, white-haired, always baked cookies for the holidays. I'd helped her son once, loaned him money to get out of a crypto scam that would have bankrupted him. She took the stand, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. I saw him," she said, voice quivering. "He was standing outside my building, watching, like a predator." Her eyes darted to me, and then away, shame in her gaze. I felt that like a punch, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. My lawyer rose, his voice steady. "Mrs. Ellison, isn't it true that your son owes Mr. Wren over $12,000 from an unpaid loan?" She blinked, her lips moving soundlessly. I don't know," she stammered. My lawyer nodded, calm as a surgeon. "So it's possible that your testimony today might be influenced by financial concerns?" She shifted in her seat, eyes darting. The judge leaned forward, face hard. "Mrs. Ellison, answer the question." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, I suppose that's possible." I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My lawyer sat down, and the judge turned to me. "Mr. Wren, do you have anything to present?" I stood. My legs felt steady, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket a cold reminder of the months I'd spent gathering evidence. I walked to the judge's bench, each step deliberate. I slid the envelope across the polished wood. It felt like everything I'd been holding back was in that single motion. The months of watching, waiting, documenting. The judge picked up the envelope, breaking the wax seal with a practiced hand. Inside was the flash drive, a sworn affidavit from Agent Royce Marin, outlining the investigation into Tessa's network. A partial transcript of an intercepted call between Tessa and an arms broker in Prague, a voice unmistakably hers, asking about delivery dates and biometric key codes. The judge read silently, his face a stone mask. He turned the pages slowly, his brows knitting with every word. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension. Finally, he looked up, his eyes sharp. "This hearing is over," he said, his voice as cold as the steel of the gavel. He turned to Tessa, her face frozen in a rictus of disbelief. "Ms. Vaughn, please rise." She stood, trembling. "You are hereby remanded into federal custody pending further investigation. Bailiff, take her into custody." Her lawyer sputtered, words tumbling from his mouth like broken glass. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "I have seen enough, counselor. If you have any legitimate concerns, you may file them through the proper channels. For now, your client is to be detained." Tessa's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw the mask crack. Fear. Raw, unfiltered. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The bailiff moved in, handcuffs at the ready. I felt the courtroom erupt around me, reporters scrambling, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in a chaotic hum. But I was still. I'd walked through fire for this moment. I'd let the lies fester, let the trap tighten around me, because I knew it was the only way to catch her. Every word, every tear, every accusation, tools she'd sharpened to cut me down, now turned back on her. The judge turned to me, his expression heavy. "Mr. Wren," he said, his voice measured, "this matter is now in the hands of federal authorities. You are free to go, but I advise you to remain available for further questioning." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. As I stepped out of the courtroom, the Seattle rain hit my face like a baptism. I stood there, breathing in the cold air, feeling the weight of everything I'd carried for so long slip from my shoulders. I'd done it. I'd survived the trap. But I knew this was only the beginning. Because Tessa's web was bigger than one courtroom, and I could feel the threads pulling at the edges of my life, threatening to unravel everything. I reached into my pocket, feeling the cool metal of the flash drive. The fight wasn't over. It was just the opening salvo in a war that had been waged in the shadows for too long. And I was ready for it. I stood on the courthouse steps, the rain soaking through my coat, and for a long moment, I couldn't move. Tessa was gone, taken by the feds, her cries echoing in that cold marble courtroom, but I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. She hadn't been after revenge. That was the hardest part to swallow. All this time, all those tears, the trembling hands, the fake bruises, they'd been a distraction. I could almost hear her voice in my head, soft and cunning. Keep them looking at the man in the mirror while the real prize walks out the back door. And the prize? That was the classified microdrive she'd stolen from me 6 months ago, the one I'd nearly bled for in Berlin, the one that carried the biometric blueprints for a defense project that could change everything. I remembered the night it disappeared, too. Our last anniversary dinner. She'd worn that pearl necklace, that same one she'd used to make herself look fragile to the judge. She'd ordered champagne, toasted to us. And later, in the shadows of our bedroom, she'd reached for my briefcase. I'd been half asleep, drunk on the illusion of trust, and I hadn't seen the switch. By the time I'd realized the drive was missing, she'd been gone, leaving only a cold kiss on my cheek and a note that said, "Don't be mad." God, I'd wanted to believe it was a mistake. But Tessa didn't make mistakes, she made plans. I pushed away from the courthouse and walked to my car, the city buzzing around me like a hive. I felt eyes on me everywhere, the reporters with their questions, the agents in their unmarked cars, the ghosts of my own regrets. I'd spent years building my reputation, and in a matter of days, she tried to rip it to shreds. But I wasn't the kind of man who broke that easily. She taught me that, in her own twisted way. I pulled out my phone and dialed Alina. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight. "Malcolm," she said, "you okay?" I leaned my head back, letting the rain slide down my face. "Define okay," I muttered. She sighed. "The agency's running damage control. Royce is in D.C. with the Joint Task Force. He wants you to know he's got your back." I swallowed the bitterness in my throat. It's not just about me anymore, Alina. She didn't come after me because she wanted me out of the picture. She came after me because she needed time to cover her tracks. Alina was quiet for a moment, then her voice hardened. "The microdrive." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "She stole it 6 months ago. It's worthless without the decryption key, but she doesn't know that. I installed a failsafe the day I got it, split the key between 3 separate drives and buried them in places even she couldn't find." I could practically hear her smile through the phone. Classic Wren. I closed my eyes. "It's more than that, Alina. If she figures out how to bypass the failsafe, she'll have access to the biometric blueprints. That project isn't just top secret, it's a game changer. AI defense systems, fully automated, beyond anything we fielded. If that data leaks, it won't just be my head on a chopping block. It'll be everyone's." She let out a low whistle. "And you think she has help?" I nodded. "She's been working with an arms broker in Prague. At least that's what Royce's intercepts suggest. But the network's bigger: crypto laundering, black market tech. And she's the spider in the middle of it all." Alina's voice was firm now, all business. "Then we need to shut her down. Permanently." I opened my eyes and stared at the raindrops sliding down the windshield. "Yeah," I said. "But first, I need to make sure the drive is worthless to her. And that means making sure she never finds the key." I ended the call and stared at the city lights beyond the glass. I remembered the night I'd installed the failsafe, hunched over my laptop in the dead of night, the whir of the hard drive the only sound in the room. I'd split the decryption key into 3 pieces, one hidden in a secure server at the agency, one buried in a vault in Zurich under a false name, and one encoded in a phrase only I would understand. An old code phrase from my days in Berlin. Tessa had always been clever, but she'd never cracked that code. The thought of that gave me a sliver of satisfaction. Even if she found the drive, she'd be staring at lines of meaningless data unless she had the key, and she'd have to go through me to get it. But I couldn't get comfortable, because Tessa never played fair, and she never played alone. I drove through the rain, the city blurring past in streaks of red and gold. My mind churned with every possibility, every angle. She was smart enough to know the drive was worthless without the key, but she'd also be desperate enough to try anything. And with the network she'd built, she'd have resources I couldn't even imagine. I parked outside my apartment and sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. I thought about Tessa, about the way she'd smiled at me that night in Prague when I'd told her about the job that had taken me away for weeks. She'd wrapped her arms around me, pressed her lips to my ear, and whispered, "One day, I'll make you pay for every lie you've ever told me." At the time, I thought it was a joke. But now, every word felt like prophecy. Inside, the apartment smelled like old coffee and adrenaline. I set the Glock on the table, checked the locks, then pulled the microdrive from its hiding place in the wall safe. It was a simple piece of tech, black casing, a single port, no markings to suggest the value it held. I ran my fingers over it, thinking about all the nights I'd spent guarding it, all the lives that might be saved or destroyed by the data it contained. I pulled out my laptop and powered it up. The failsafe kicked in immediately, asking for the key I'd built from 100 fragments of my life, dates, names, moments only I knew. I entered the first part, the one stored in the agency's server. The screen flickered, the failsafe confirming the input. 1 down, 2 to go. The second part was stored in Zurich. I'd have to go there myself. No courier could be trusted with what was at stake. And the third part? That was the code phrase. I whispered it to myself, testing the way it felt on my tongue. It was the name of the cafe where I'd first met Royce in Berlin. A simple place with the worst coffee and the best memories. I leaned back in my chair, the microdrive in my hand. Tessa thought she'd stolen the key to the kingdom. She thought she could trade it for freedom, for power, maybe even for my head on a plate. But what she didn't know was that I'd built the one thing she could never fake, never duplicate, the failsafe that made the drive worthless without me. She wanted to destroy me. She wanted the world to believe I was the monster. But in the end, she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd married. And now? Now it was my turn to take back the truth. The morning after the courtroom showdown, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the sound of Tessa's screams as the bailiff dragged her away. She'd played her part so well. White dress, trembling voice, crocodile tears. But now the curtain had dropped, and the real show was about to begin. Because even as the feds let her off, I knew she wasn't working alone. She never had. She'd built a network of shadows. Crypto accounts, dead drops, voices in the dark. And at the center of that network, like a spider in a web, was Harper Lynn. Harper had been Tessa's best friend since college, or at least that's what she claimed. I'd always thought there was something off about her. She was the kind of woman who smiled with her teeth but never her eyes. The kind of woman who wore 3 different perfumes depending on which lies she was selling that day. She'd been at every dinner party, every celebration, always with a perfectly timed compliment and a polite laugh. I'd caught her once in the guest room rifling through my files. She'd said she was looking for a charger. I pretended to believe her. After the hearing, I went back to my apartment and poured myself a drink. Bourbon. Neat. I needed the burn in my throat to remind me I was still alive. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Obsidian file, my lifeline, my insurance policy. The feed from the warehouse had gone dead 2 hours ago, right after the agent swept the place. But I still had eyes on Harper. Alina had set up a tracker on her phone weeks ago, hidden in a birthday card I'd handed her myself. I watched her little blue dot move across the map, first to her loft downtown, then to a small coffee shop in Pioneer Square. Then, nothing. The signal cut out like a candle in the wind. I called Alina. She answered on the first ring. "She's gone dark," I said, my voice flat. Alina cursed under her breath. "I thought she'd be the first to bolt," she said. "She's got half the crypto keys from the warehouse accounts." I let that sink in. And probably a chunk of the black market contacts, too, I muttered. She'll try to disappear. But she's too sloppy to go off-grid completely. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Memories came in a rush. Harper at the gala where I'd met Tessa, her laugh too loud. Harper at our wedding, holding Tessa's veil like a maid of honor she'd never been asked to be. Harper in our kitchen one night, telling me she'd always known Tessa deserved better. That night, she'd worn a white blouse that smelled like my wife's perfume. I should have known then. Alina's voice pulled me back. I ran a trace on her last known location, she said. She made a wire transfer through a shell account in Belize, probably trying to move funds before the feds freeze everything. I closed my eyes, picturing the warehouse, the ledgers I'd pieced together. She's using Tessa's playbook, I muttered. Disappear the money, disappear herself. And then what? New name, new country. Alina's silence was answer enough. She finally said, "We have a chance to intercept the transfer, but we'll need to move fast. And you're the only one who knows her well enough to predict her next move." I drained the glass and set it down with a thunk. "Tell me where she's going," I said. An hour later, I was at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, scanning the departures board for flights to Rome. That's where the dead drop was, an abandoned post office box I'd flagged months ago, back when Tessa had started funneling crypto through Harper's accounts. I bought a last-minute ticket on a red-eye and slipped through security with the same ease I'd practiced in every airport from Berlin to Bogota. On the plane, I stared at the sea back in front of me, running through every conversation I'd ever had with Harper. She'd always been the one to ask the questions, the one who probed a little too deep, smiled a little too easily. I'd answered her half-truths with half-lies of my own, but it was always a dance, two predators circling, waiting for the other to slip. I'd underestimated her, the way I'd underestimated Tessa. That was my mistake. And now I was going to fix it. Rome was a maze of old streets and shadows, the kind of city where the past whispered through the cobblestones. I'd been there once before, on a job that ended in a gunfight in a wine cellar. But this time, I was hunting something more dangerous than any gunman. I made my way to the old post office, its windows dark, the smell of dust and old paper thick in the air. I found the box easily, a small metal door with a number that meant nothing to anyone but me and Harper. I forced it open with a small pry bar, the lock giving way with a soft click. Inside was a single envelope, thick and yellowed. I pulled it out, my hand steady. Inside was a flash drive, a key ring, and a note in Harper's handwriting. "You always thought you were smarter than me. Let's see if you're smart enough to stay alive." The note felt like a punch to the gut. I slipped the drive into my pocket, scanning the shadows. Harper was here. I could feel it. She'd always liked the thrill of the chase, the dance of predator and prey. I stepped out into the alley, my breath misting in the cool night air. "Hello, Malcolm," a voice purred from the darkness. She stepped forward, her hair pulled back, eyes glittering with triumph. I always knew it would come down to this. She was holding a small pistol, the barrel trained on my chest. "You think you can just walk away?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "You think you can leave Tessa behind like a broken toy? She made you, Malcolm. She gave you everything." I felt my pulse steady, my training taking over. I held her gaze, my own hand slipping to the Glock at my side. "She made me nothing but a mark," I said. "And you were her lapdog." She laughed thin, a short, bitter sound. "You still don't get it. This was never about Tessa. It was about power. And you gave us everything we needed, names, contacts, weaknesses." She took a step closer, the gun unwavering. "But the best part? You still think you're the hero." I let out a slow breath, my eyes locked on hers. "I'm not the hero," I said. "I'm just the one who's still standing." In one smooth motion, I drew my gun and fired. The shot echoed down the alley, sharp and final. Harper crumpled, her eyes wide with shock, the gun slipping from her hand. I moved forward, kicking it away, checking her pulse. Nothing. I crouched there for a long moment, staring at the woman who'd tried to end me. She'd been a friend once, or at least a shadow of one. Now she was just another name in the file, another piece of Tessa's broken empire. I picked up the flash drive, holding it to the light. The key to the rest of her network, maybe. The final puzzle piece. I called Alina, my voice calm. "It's done," I said. "Harper's dead. I've got the drive." She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew the answer. "Come home," she said. "We're not finished yet." I looked down at Harper's body, then up at the Roman sky. The battle was over, but the war was still mine to fight. and I wasn't going to stop until every lie was exposed. Zurich, a city built on secrets and bank vaults, where old money and new crimes crossed paths like lovers in the dark. I'd flown in under a false name, using one of the many passports I kept for emergencies like this. The air smelled like rain and cold stone, the kind of scent that told you you'd come to the right place for answers, or the wrong place to make a mistake. I'd spent half the flight turning the envelope over in my mind, thinking of Tessa's note. You always knew more than I gave you credit for. But you were never the monster. I was. Good luck proving it. I could still see her handwriting, that neat, slanted script she'd used to sign birthday cards and grocery lists. Always the perfect wife, the perfect liar. The vault was under the name M. Wren, a detail I'd set up years ago, back when I first realized the people I loved most could be the ones who'd ruin me. A fallback plan, a place to bury the worst truths. The name on the vault key matched the fake passport in my pocket, a carefully constructed lie I'd worn for years. I told Tessa once that sometimes the only way to survive in my line of work was to be the best liar in the room. She'd smiled at that, said it was the most honest thing I'd ever told her. She'd known all along that the line between truth and fiction was thinner than a razor blade. And now I was here, because of her. The bank itself was old, polished marble floors, brass fixtures that gleamed even in the gray light. A place built to make money feel safe, even if the world outside was on fire. I stepped through the revolving door, feeling the weight of the city press in around me. My reflection stared back at me from 100 polished surfaces, a man in a dark coat, his eyes sharp, his jaw tight. A man who'd seen too much to trust anything at face value. Guten Morgen, the clerk greeted me, her accent crisp. I handed her the key, my fingers steady. Ich habe einen Termin, I said, the German feeling foreign on my tongue. She nodded, typing something into the computer. A green light blinked. Bitfolgen Sie mir. She led me down a narrow hallway, past offices filled with men in suits and women with eyes like hawks. At the end of the corridor, a thick steel door loomed, a vault built to withstand war, earthquake, betrayal. She pressed her hand to the scanner. The lock disengaged with a quiet hiss, and the door swung open. Inside, the vault was lined with rows of small, identical boxes, each one a story waiting to be told. She gestured to box 347. This is yours. I inserted the key, the metal cold against my palm. The lock clicked open, and I slid the door back. Inside was a single manila envelope, its flap sealed with wax. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in my hand, a lifetime condensed into a few grams of paper and plastic. I sat down at the small table the bank provided and broke the seal. Inside was a letter in Tessa's handwriting, a passport with her name, and a stack of cryptocurrency cold wallets. But it was the microdrive that made my blood run cold. It sat there, black and unassuming, a piece of plastic and metal that could bring down governments if the data inside ever saw the light of day. I picked up the letter first. Her voice was in every word, that same blend of charm and venom that had made me love her and hate her in equal measure. You always knew more than I gave you credit for, but you were never the monster. I was. Good luck proving it. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. She'd known I'd find it. She'd wanted me to. Maybe it was her last play, her final twist of the knife, to show me just how deep her betrayal went, to prove that even now, she could make me dance to her tune. I turned my attention to the cold wallets, 3 of them, each holding enough crypto to buy a small country. Blood money, stolen from arms deals and tech transfers, laundered through fake charities and shell companies. I recognized the addresses, some of them I'd traced myself, others I'd only guessed at. She'd left them for me like breadcrumbs, like a promise that the game wasn't over yet. But it was the microdrive that demanded my focus. I turned it over in my hand, my reflection staring back at me from its smooth surface. The biometric blueprints were inside, AI defense systems, facial recognition algorithms, deep learning protocols that could revolutionize the way nations fought wars, or the way they controlled their own people. I'd spent months hunting that drive, knowing that in the wrong hands, it could change the world, and not for the better. But Tessa hadn't known about the failsafe. She'd thought she was clever, that she could use the drive to buy her freedom. But without the decryption key, it was worthless, a dead piece of plastic that might as well have been a paperweight. And the key? She'd never even known it existed, let alone how to find it. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction as I tucked the drive into my inner pocket. For all her planning, she'd never been able to see past her own reflection. She'd thought she could outsmart me. She'd thought she could build a world on lies and expect the truth to just roll over and die. But the truth had claws. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the vault door. A guard stood nearby, his eyes on me, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. I gave him a polite nod, and he returned it, professional and silent. I'd been that man once, a soldier in the shadows, watching for threats that might never come. But now I was the threat, the man with the secrets no one wanted to see. I thought about Tessa's last words to me before she vanished. You'll never know who your real enemies are. She'd meant it as a taunt, but she'd been right. I didn't know who else she'd corrupted, who she'd paid off, who she'd blackmailed. But I knew this. I wouldn't stop until every last thread of her network was unraveled. I packed the envelope back into the vault and locked it again. The bank clerk was waiting when I emerged. She gave me a polite smile and led me back to the lobby, her heels clicking on the polished floor like a metronome, counting down to something I couldn't yet name. Outside, the Zurich air felt colder than I remembered. I pulled my coat tight and started down the street, the weight of the microdrive heavy in my pocket. I knew the feds were closing in on Tessa's network, but I also knew they'd be too slow, too careful. They'd wait for warrants, for chain of custody. I didn't have that luxury. I pulled out my phone and dialed Alina. She answered on the first ring, her voice urgent. Tell me you've got it. I've got it, I said, my breath fogging in the cold air. And more than that, I've got her confession. She admitted she was the monster. I'm holding it in my hand. There was a pause, then Alina's voice softened. That's big, Malcolm. That's everything. Not everything, I said, scanning the crowd. She's still out there, Alina. Somewhere. And she's still got people who believe in her. I need to finish this. I need to make sure she can't hurt anyone else. You will, she said, her voice steady. I trust you. I let the silence stretch between us, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down. I'll be in touch, I said finally, and hung up. I pocketed the phone and started walking. The city bustled around me, cars, buses, tourists snapping photos of the old churches. But all I saw was the mission ahead, the path that had led me here. Tessa had left me a trail, and I was going to follow it to the bitter end. Because this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about every lie she'd ever told, every life she'd tried to ruin, every truth she'd buried. And I wasn't the kind of man who let the truth stay buried. Venice had always been a city of illusions, water that mirrored the sky, bridges that led nowhere, faces that turned away at the first sign of trouble. It was the perfect place to hide if you didn't want to be found. And Tessa, in her infinite cunning, had chosen it for her last stand. I tracked her here through a money trail that reeked of desperation, crypto accounts wiped clean, shell companies collapsing like houses of cards, contacts going silent one by one. I'd pieced together her path through dead drops and coded messages, each step a testament to the chaos she'd tried to create. But in the end, even she couldn't outrun the net closing in around her. I found her in a gallery off a narrow street near San Marco, where the art on the walls was overpriced and the patrons smelled of old money and stolen time. She'd taken the name Sabrina Gray, a gallery curator with a perfect smile and a flawless fake accent. She'd always been good at playing roles, and here she wore this one like a second skin. She moved among the paintings, greeting ambassadors and politicians, sipping wine as though she'd never been the woman who'd tried to sell a microdrive with enough classified data to start a war. I stood in the doorway, watching her. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes were on a man in a navy suit. Some minor dignitary, she was working like a mark. Her laugh was soft and genuine. The same laugh she'd used to convince me she loved me once. I let that sound wash over me, a reminder of every lie she'd ever told. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch. She just smiled that slow, dangerous smile and lifted her glass in a silent toast. Malcolm, she said, her voice smooth as silk. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm full of surprises, I replied, stepping into the room. Around us, the chatter continued, oblivious to the history between us. I could see the agents in the corners now, their suits too sharp, their eyes too alert. Royce's people. Back up at last. Tessa tilted her head, studying me. You know, I always admired that about you, she said. Your ability to find me, no matter where I ran. You made it easy, I told her. You always left a trail. Maybe you wanted me to find you. Her smile faded, and for a moment, I saw the woman behind the mask, the one who'd shared my bed, whispered my name in the dark, promised me forever. But that woman was gone, buried under too many lies. "You're not the man I married," she said, her voice low. I stepped closer, my own voice steady. "You're right," I said. "He was just the disguise." The agents moved and then, silent and efficient. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just stood there, the glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the marble floor. Her eyes never left mine. As they led her away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was the end of her story. But mine? Mine was just beginning. 9 months. That's how long it's been since Tessa was taken into federal custody, since the last piece of her puzzle fell apart under the weight of her own lies. Her brother's serving 10 years for conspiracy and fraud. Harper, well, I ended that chapter myself. The rest of her network is still being unraveled, but it's like chasing shadows, each lead another ghost waiting to vanish. I'm still working with the agency, though not in the way I used to. No more field work, no more undercover identities. I'm Malcolm Wren, the man they thought was a ghost. The man who walked through the fire and came out the other side with scars no one can see. Some nights, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and I can still hear Tessa's voice whispering in the dark. "You're not the man I married." Maybe she's right. Maybe that man died the day she turned my life into a courtroom sideshow. But the one who came out the other side? He's sharper, stronger. And he's never going to be caught off guard again. On my wall, in a simple black frame, hangs the envelope that started it all. The headline from that courtroom, Monster or Mastermind. I let people decide for themselves, because I've learned that truth doesn't need defending, it just needs time to prove itself. So I let the silence speak. Because sometimes the loudest thing in the world is the sound of a man who refuses to be broken.